Most of you know that I've acted in a number of community theater plays, starting with Kernersville Little Theater's production of Fiddler on the Roof back in 1987. I played Mordecai the innkeeper with pain and poverty and hardship. And Joyce, whom I got to know during Fiddler, used to say that I played the merriest innkeeper in Anatevka. There's even footage to back up this assertion. How many of you know the show at all? You know the tavern scene? Right, just before the L'chaim to life number? All right. Well, during the tavern scene, Tevye and Laser Wolf are negotiating the engagement of Tevye and Golda's oldest daughter, Seidel, to Laser Wolf. Laser Wolf is the butcher on the shtetl. As the tavern keeper, I was supposed to bustle around pouring drinks for all the guys who were there. Well, on one of the performance nights, I found myself at Tevye and Laser Wolf's table, directly between them, with less than a finger of water left in the bottle. Luckily for us, vodka is clear. I held up the bottle, looked at the amount in it, shrugged, then raised the bottle to my lips and drained the swallow of water that was still left in it. Joyce pointed out to me afterwards that you shouldn't upstage your fellow actors like that. In addition to KLT, I've acted in shows at the Stained Glass Playhouse, which is the number 2 spot I've done, in terms of numbers, the Winston-Salem Little Theater, the Community Theater of Greensboro, and at Sedge Garden United Methodist Church. This last was where I played Herod Antipas in Jesus Christ Superstar 9 years ago. It was exactly 9 years ago, and this month I was in rehearsals because that was when the fire happened.
That's right.
But I'd rather talk about another play when Kernersville produced South Pacific for the first time in 1992. Now, I seriously considered auditioning for South Pacific. I really did. But I would almost have had to play one of the sailors, even if I also had a bit part that was non-military. And every time I thought about auditioning for and accepting a role, I just couldn't bring myself to do it. Never mind that I agree with the message of the show, which is against racism. Never mind that Quakers agree with the message. Never mind that the script was adapted from James Michener's first book, Tales from the South Pacific, and that Michener was a Quaker when he wrote it. Never mind that the next year's musical at KLT would be Kismet, and I would end up playing the role I had my sights on when we chose the play, the Wicked Wazir, the bad guy of the show, the ultimate bad cop. See, the Wazir is really a caricature, which might be why playing him didn't bother me, while playing much more realistic servicemen did. For whatever reason, I just couldn't bring myself to audition for the show, which surprised some folks. It surprised me how strong my reaction was, to be honest. Joyce used to say that I must have been a Quaker at least once before in a previous lifetime to have our peace testimony so deeply ingrained in me. Maybe, but it might just be that I grew up reading the Bible and remember that part where it says to turn the other cheek. Or that passage in James 4 which says that wars come from frustrated and unfulfilled desires. It might be, I suppose, that I have never really been comfortable with what you might call God and country services, mostly because they usually end up turning into country is God services. But whatever the reason, I just couldn't do it. I guess it was our peace testimony. Another testimony we Quakers are known for is, of course, integrity. That's one of the reasons we don't swear oaths in court, a right we Quakers have had by parliamentary statute here in North Carolina since 1689 for civil cases and since 1777 for criminal cases. We've also been permitted to give our affirmation rather than take an oath when entering into public office for a long time as well. In fact, when I worked the 2010 census, first as a crew leader, later as an enumerator, I gave an affirmation rather than took the oath. And I went out of my way to let the members of the crew which I managed know that they had the right to do so as well. None of them took me up on it, so I administered the oath to them, but wouldn't swear to it myself. Part of the biblical basis for our integrity testimony, at least the part about oath taking, is from the Sermon on the Mount as recorded in Matthew 5:33 to 37. And I did look it up. Again, you have heard that it was said to the men of old, "You shall not swear falsely, but shall perform to the Lord what you have sworn. But I say to you, do not swear at all, either by heaven, for it is the throne of God, or by the earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. Do not swear by your head, for you cannot make one hair white or black. Let what you say simply be yes or no. Anything more than this comes from evil." This is echoed in James 5:12, which is attributed to Jesus' oldest brother, who was in charge of the Jesus movement, or the early church if you prefer, in Jerusalem during New Testament times. Another situation which sometimes arises is efforts to require adults or school children to recite what? The Pledge of Allegiance. I have to admit that I was taught to do this in elementary school myself. And then when my meeting would have Vacation Bible School each summer, we would say the Pledge of Allegiance, the pledge to the Christian flag, and the pledge to the Bible every day before we got started. Later, after I grew up, graduated from Guilford, went to England and returned, it seemed to me that the pledge is essentially a loyalty oath, and I stopped reciting it. Many Quakers also declined to recite the pledge for much the same reason, while others have no problem with it. I stand while it is said, because for me, reciting the pledge is the issue, not my objections to it, and because I do love this country and respect its ideals, just how much became clearer for me when I was outside America. In the summer of 1985, I was in England, in the ancient city of York, to be precise, which is known for the number of Quakers, among other things. And I had a problem. I was looking for a couple of fireworks, just simple things, because what day was at hand? The 4th of July, that most American of holidays, and I couldn't find any. And yes, at that point, I had known for over 10 years that the real date on which independence was declared was on the 2nd of July, 1776. I grew up watching Captain Kangaroo, and the captain had told us kids about it, and the captain wouldn't lie to us. I must have visited every tobacconist's shop in York, because somebody suggested vaguely that I might find firecrackers or sparklers at a tobacconist's. But I came up with bupkis. Nothing. Nada. I found out later that the best time to buy fireworks in the UK was in October. I could have bought them as soon as I got there, but didn't know. Bonfire night, or if you prefer, Guy Fawkes Day, is on the 5th of November. You see, and this was June. The year before, when I was talking myself into going to England in the first place, I told myself that if my ancestors could make the trip here under much more adverse conditions than I would face, then I could make the trip in reverse. How many of you know how big the Mayflower probably was? It was probably no longer than about 90 to 100 feet and probably no wider than about 25 feet. And it made its most famous voyage with around 130 people crammed on board that tiny little tub. As I said, I had arrived in York at the beginning of October, but it took me until I was sitting outdoors overlooking Plymouth Harbor a few days after Christmas before I felt at home in the United Kingdom. And then in times of stress, my body would tend to shift the 5 hours back towards the schedule based on Eastern Standard Time. Well, even when I went to Sheffield in June of 1985 to hear Billy Graham, I have to admit that it was as much to hear somebody speak without an accent as it was to listen to his religious message. In other words, I was homesick. I certainly understood what Paul Simon was talking about in one of his songs, which was a hit around the same time as Watergate was consuming the national attention back in 1973. It was one of my favorite recordings that early summer in York. Many is the time I've been mistaken, and many times confused. Yes, and I've often felt forsaken, and certainly misused. Oh, but I'm all right, just weary to my bones. Still, you don't expect to be bright and bon vivant, so far away from home, so far away from home. And I don't know a soul who's not been battered. I don't have a friend who feels at ease. I don't know a dream that's not been shattered or driven to its knees. But it's all right, for we've lived so well, so long. Still, when I think of the road we're traveling on, I wonder what's gone wrong. Can't help it, I wonder what's gone wrong. Sounds rather familiar and applicable now, doesn't it? According to one story, Simon actually had the dream that he describes in the next part of the song, the bridge, in which the Statue of Liberty recedes from view. This, of course, is the disastrous reversals of everything symbolized by the mighty woman with a torch whose flame is the imprisoned lightning, and her name, Mother of Exiles. And that bit has always gotten me. If you've ever felt adrift, alone, exiled, it probably has gotten you too. And I dreamed I was flying, and high up above my eyes could clearly see the Statue of Liberty sailing away to sea. And I dreamed I was flying. We come on the ship they call the Mayflower. We come on the ship that sailed the moon. We come in the age's most uncertain hours and sing an American tune. Oh, and it's all right. You can't be forever blessed. Still, tomorrow's gonna be another working day, and I'm trying to get some rest. That's all I'm trying, to get some rest. For the rest of the world, this country has been a haven and a beacon of hope. And Simon's lyrics don't want us to lose that. For me, it was just home, and in some ways, I was getting ready to come back to it. I'm trying to get some rest, is what the song says after all. We Quakers largely agree with Paul Simon's views in American Tune about this country and our proper place in it. Many people in more socially and politically conservative Christian denominations like to point to Romans 13, 1-7, and Paul's instructions that we should be subject to the governing authorities because the authorities have been instituted by God. While we Quakers take the passage in Romans seriously, we take just as seriously Peter's response to the Sanhedrin when they reiterate their demand that he and the other apostles stop their preaching. We must obey God rather than men, which is Acts 5:29. The result has been that while we've been quite willing to engage in civil disobedience when necessary, we also expect that those who do so will face the consequences those in authority might visit upon them. This is sometimes part of the price of being faithful to God before the government, after all. At the same time, we work for the repeal of such unjust laws and the end of the penalties attached to disobedience of them. I was fortunate. All that I had to face in 1992 was that I didn't get to act in a play which I didn't want to be in the first place. Instead, I was in the crew instead of the cast. I was the assistant sadomasochist, stage manager. And there were no penalties attached to my choice except that I had to keep an eye on everybody else. Others haven't been as fortunate when they strove for the freedom to practice their religion freely and openly, or marry whom they love, or when they strove to bring freedom to the enslaved or rights to women, people of color, and the poor. When we do these things, we are working for the realization of the kingdom of God on earth, and ultimately, that is our calling. Amen.